Hi and good evening. This is Tiger. Welcome to my stream. Good evening, AJ. Looks like today everything worked out as planned and we are actually already live on Twitch. CD Radar, ahoy! Nice to see you on the stream. Today we are not doing American stuff, so you can be relieved. We're doing... I can see, yes, you can read what I wrote. I wanted to talk about... Is that my favorite map, he asks. AJ says can't hear anything. Is that just me? I guess so. CD Radar answered me when I said that we're not doing American stuff. Maybe it's just for you. OBS actually tells me that I am transmitting sound. And we are doing Munich, Augsburg today. For some reason we have never had this on the stream today. Yes, CD Radar can hear me. Maybe it's only going towards the east and not towards the west, to the room where AJ is. Anyway, we are doing, if I did not make any spelling mistakes, Hauptstrecke, München, Augsburg. Oldish DLC, never played it a lot. Never had it on the stream, and now we're doing it today. And why are we doing it today? Because we're talking about some basic stuff that is in the rules. Spectre, hey, see you! When I'm going through the directives that you can download from the DB Netzwerk website, or what it is called now, InfraGo, they call themselves now. Whatever, they have a new thing where you can download the directives, and it is much more easy to find the directive that you want to use compared to how it was before. So what I was trying to do, we have talked often about some things only apply if you are a shunting service, some things apply only if you are a train service, and you can do this as a shunting service but not a train service. But we have never really talked about how a train service can be determined as not being a shunting service, and maybe how one service can go into the other. And so I've tried to dig through the regulation a bit and to get stuff out of it that we can actually use in the game. And it is getting more and more complicated. The more stuff we're talking about, the more pieces we put on our table, the more understanding is necessary on my side for the whole picture, and it is just growing eventually as I am doing those videos and play the game and read the regulations and more regulations and more regulations, and more it is susceptible to local regulations. And so what we can do here obviously is only to get out some basic lines and what we can make of it in the game. CD Radar says I spent the most time on this map by driving here and there, ICE there, RE back, S-Bahn there, freight back. Great map, but then the PCB, yeah, the PCB bugs are sometimes a bit weird, obviously. But there are actually in the LZB Ensuing you have this hidden 1000 Hertz monitoring on the ICE service, what is quite nice, because I've never seen it in a different DLC. As soon as the Ensuing starts in LZB, you have to comply with PCB monitorings, even if you do not see them yet, because you don't have the indicators on your board yet. And so that is actually implemented well as far as I have seen. Not so much other stuff with the PCB. There are a couple of magnets that are always on, even if they are not supposed to be on. Distant signals that are announced with distant signal announcement boards, but then they don't have a distant signal board and stuff like this. Well, nevertheless, it is a good DLC, and it has interesting stuff, and it has a lot of track and a lot of routes. This must be really a nightmare for the guys checking all the routes and so it is not surprising that there are some bugs in it. I wanted to use two services that are in the journey mode. And CD Radio says this was your first DLC, actually. Interesting. Yeah, well, then I understand why you spent so much time there. But the Regional Express service, they are layering services, no? From other maps where the 425 comes in. So you must have had those then when you were doing the Regional Express. Or were they just done by the 423 then? Well, what I want to use as a cliffhanger for going into the presentation is a situation that you encounter in the game quite a lot, and people are always complaining that this is not how you would start a train and it's the wrong signal, and those are bugs. I used to think so myself, but then maybe there is actually a possibility to explain some of those situations within the rules, and I just wanted to talk about this. Getting started, we have our ICE3, the one that comes with Munich, obviously. Let's just open the doors so that we have a bit time to talk about stuff. Safety systems. AFB. So did it work? 40, yes, it worked. Lights, headlights dimmed, let's set them to normal. And yeah, what I wanted to talk about is this signal. HP 0 with SH1 here in the west. And we all know already that those two lights allow us to pass this signal, but only as a shunting service, not as a train service. The signal book is quite clear on that. That means if we are starting the train now, we cannot be a train service, we must be a shunting service. And then we will see what consequence this has for us as soon as we are going out. Typically, the first consequence would be, if we know a bit about shunting services, somewhere we have heard, we have to not go faster than 25 as a shunting service. Still, we will see we have a limit of 40, that is line speed here. Is there any way we can say it's actually allowed to go 40 here, as it is prescribed? And then, when can we go faster? And can we just go along with 40, or do we have to be wary not to run into other trains or have to stop in front of one of those little red buggers there, the HP1s on the Schotterzwerge, the dwarf signals? This is what I want to talk to about today. Usually we would have to press the PCB override, the Befehlstaste, because the 2000 Hz should be on. I would have thought it is not in the DLC here. No Befehl 40 program. You can see, okay, this one is for us, and it is obviously SH1 allowing us to go. But then there is a lot of red on the table here now. And maybe actually one of those reds is for us. If we know where we are going, then we know that this red one here is obviously for us. And this is no joke. This one is actually red for us. We have to adhere to those little Schotterzwerge, dwarf signals. if we are started this way, not with a green signal, not with a Fahrtbegriff, not with a proceed aspect, but only allowed as a shunting service here. So, let's see what this chat is saying. A CD radio said, and of course, now with the ability to build any trains anywhere on this map, an infinity of possibilities open up, and I started building IC trains with Vectrons here. Unfortunately, only the PCB. So this is correct. With the hidden PCB under LCB. We will get to this later. Yeah, this is correct. And the signal starting here, I don't know if it is correct in this situation here, but we will talk about the things, and maybe we can find an explanation why it is okay to start the train with this signal here. And Spectre says, do we have to stop to change from shunting to train, or was it the other way around? We will talk about this too. Typically, we have to stop to switch from train to shunting, unless there is one situation where we do not have to. And typically, we do not have to change from shunting to train, unless there are a couple of situations where we have to do it anyway. Let's have the presentation on quite early today. And what I have been doing was actually go through the glossary in the Directive 408, the Fahrdienstvorschrift, and to try to sort out some terms that are used there, because they are more or less the basic for everything that comes after that with shunting and train services. What encompasses all of it is called the Bahnbetrieb, railway operation, the moving of railway vehicles. That is what you can find here in the glossary. It is given in the module 2101 for the typical train services, and the 2101 and the 4801 for the shunting. Again, the module 48 and so on is for the shunting. The rest is for running trains typically, or what is true for both of it. And then there is a 5, 8 and so on for Betriebsbahnhof. Yes, but this is a word that we are not talking about today. The 5001 is for local regulations and how to set them. So, Bahnbetrieb, Bewegen von Fahrzeugen, railway operation, movement of railway vehicles, means either driving of trains or shunting, also called switching. Those two things. So if it's not one, it's the other. And this catches everything that we can do in our railway operation when we are moving railway vehicles. So this is the dividing line between driving of trains and shunting. And driving of trains, a train or a train service, is defined quite complicated in this glossary, but the main thing is that you have at least one working powered vehicle. It can be consist with not powered vehicles like cars or with dead locomotives, but you need to have at least one working powered vehicle, one arbeitendes Triebfahrzeug in your train. And if you have only this working powered vehicle, then it can be a train as well. Sometimes you have those maintenance things like Nebenfahrzeuge. They can be treated as trains also. And well, the same thing you have also on the shunting side for a shunting service, Rangierfahrten. Also, this one has at least one working powered vehicle. Maybe it has two of them, more of them, maybe there's other vehicles that are not powered. So what is the dividing thing for it? A train service can go onto the open track or run within station limits. Well, the Rangierfahrt can also run within station limits, but it cannot go onto open track. A shunting service is what we don't want to have on the open track. typically. This is why we have those signs with saying Halt für Rangierfahrten, stop for shunting. Shunting service is most of the time, there are some exceptions, limited to yard limits, station limits. And as soon as the consist is supposed to go out into the open track, it needs to be a Zug, a train service. And for that, it needs to have a timetable telling where it is supposed to go, from what track to what Betriebsstelle, and so on. And this needs to be set out in a Fahrplan that also gives you then information how many Bremshundertstel you need to have. Whereas for a Rangierfahrt, you do not need to have a Fahrplan. And this is actually nothing that the Deutsche Bahn has come up with, or what is defined only in the directives, but this is actually in federal law, set out in federal law, section 34, paragraph 1. Die Eisenbahnbau- und Betriebsordnung, what is the railway building and operation code. And there you can find this definition for a train service. And train services are typically allowed by a dispatcher that is called the Fahrdienstleiter. Whereas a Rangierfahrt is typically not allowed by the Fahrdienstleiter, but a guy called the Weichenwärter, who is more or less the dispatcher for the yard. There are some situations where this Weichenwärter, this kind of dispatcher, has to get permission from the Fahrdienstleiter first before he can allow a Rangierfahrt, and all this is set out in this part of the directive. This is especially if you want to do some shunting on main tracks where the trains typically run. Another thing, I don't have it on the slides here, you divide tracks between main tracks and secondary tracks, and secondary tracks are such tracks that are not usually used by trains or by shunting services. And every time you want to do your shunting in the tracks where trains are supposed to run, typically the Weichenwärter has to get the consent from the Fahrdienstleiter if he wants to allow a shunting service. What else is there in shunting and switching? Not only shunting services are under the roof of the term shunting and switching, there are other forms of shunting and switchings that do not necessarily involve vehicles that are moved by a working powered vehicle. That would be, I just go through the words because they are so nice, and it's always interesting to know what they are actually meaning. Abdrücken, that means on a hump yard, you know, those classification yards where typically computer controlled shunting locomotives are pushing car and car and car over a crest, and then into many tracks that are connected with many switches, and then the cars can be sorted by switching the switches while the cars are running down the hill on their own, and then they are stopped again. So this will be what in American operating rules is often called humping, as far as I can see, that the locomotive pushes the car that is no longer coupled to the locomotive over the crest, and then the car runs down. That would be ablaufen. This is what the car does, and abdrücken is what the locomotive does. The vehicle's running down the hump yard hill on their own, driven by gravity, not by a locomotive. Then we have abstoßen, what is, if I have seen it correctly in the operating rules in many American railroads, is called kicking. That would be you pushing, you have a locomotive pushing a car, and then either you uncouple it or it was not coupled in the first place. You accelerate it, and then the locomotive stays back and the car runs on. This is a technique, hump yard. Hump yard is the, yeah, hump yard is a great name. Well, we know what we are talking about when we're talking about a hump yard in terms of shunting and switching, and what we are talking about when we're talking about kicking. And I have never seen that done here nowadays. kicking, actually, it is quite dangerous. I have to say that the Czech word for this is also funny, says CD, right? Okay. Is kicking being done in, I think you're talking about the word for hump yard, but just out of interest, is kicking being done? Abstoßen und ablaufen lassen verboten. Yeah, reads on many cars locos. Yes, oh, that's true. And then you can't do this with this particular car. And now we have verified what it is actually, that it is forbidden for those cars. Abstoßen is, well, I have never seen it and I've never heard that it is still done. I think it is a quite dangerous thing to do if not everyone involved knows what they are doing. The opposite of abstoßen, kicking, would be a thing that is called dropping, I think, in American operating rules. This is not pushing the car and then the locomotive stays back, but this is pulling the car and then uncouple them and run away with the locomotive, draw away with the locomotive, and then the car is running on its own. This is typically forbidden according to German operative rules, unless it is allowed in local regulations. If I remember correctly, there is a clause that allows it for local regulations, but I have never heard that this is done anywhere. It is not even a word in the glossary for it. But there is a clause in the 48 and so on, somewhere that prohibits this unless it is allowed in local regulations. Kicking, not the dropping, I mean. Aufdrücken would be pushing a vehicle against another vehicle for coupling and uncoupling. This is what we're typically doing with our locomotives before we couple. In the game, it is not a thing. If the loco is a bit away from the cars, you just click on the coupling and then everything jumps into place. But in real life, you would want to push the locomotive against the cars so that the springs in the buffers are compressed a bit, and that coupling is easier because the parts that you need to get close for coupling are closer together. And same thing for uncoupling. If the train is totally stretched, then it is hard to uncouple because everything is tense and you don't want to do this. So this would be the Aufdrücken. And Beidrücken would mean that you have, say, two cars that are standing not close to each other but with a gap in between, and you're pushing one vehicle to the other so that they can be coupled. And then what we also have in this definition is verschieben, and verschieben is very archaic. This means moving the vehicles by means other than a powered railway vehicle, especially by humans. So obviously humans can push or shove about a railway car, or you can do it with wrenches or with horses or with tractors. All that stuff would be verschieben. And as you can imagine, you need to be extremely careful when doing this, because when you're employing horses or wrenches or people pushing railway cars around, then this is extremely prone to errors and injury. So now we have all the words that are in the glossary connected with the Bahnbetrieb, railway operations, if we divide it into driving of trains and shunting, and what shunting encompasses. It's not only the shunting service. Shunting service is close to the train service because we need at least one working power vehicle that provides the power for it. And then we have all this other stuff that is also shunting, but it is not a shunting service. And by definition, if you are moving railway vehicles in a Baugleis, and typically this is done in the form of a shunting service, in a construction track, that means it is a track where there is construction work going on, and therefore it is not usable for trains. So every railway movement there would be shunting. So you cannot have, according to the rules, as far as I can understand them, you cannot have a train running in a construction track on a Baugleis, by definition. Then train services, there are many different things where you can subdivide train services and where you can draw information out of it. Like some trains are running according to a Fahrplan that allows them to go every day. Then some of the trains are going only on Sundays, some of them are going only on certain holidays, and then there are even trains that are not in the general timetable as well, and they are just set up because we need it now all of a sudden, des Gelegenheitsverkehrs. But that is not so our topic today, also not AS-Züge like außergewöhnliche Sendungen, special goods trains. What we always have the distinction, and this is here below train service, passenger train or freight train. So as a shunting service, you don't have this subdivision between passenger train and freight train. It comes first the division between trains and shunting services before you get to the division between passenger train and freight train. And this is also already in federal law. This is nothing that the DB came up with, but this is already in the federal law for more than 100 years that we have to divide our trains between passenger trains and freight trains. And this is where the speed limits, for example, that are also in this EBO specified that a passenger train cannot go faster than 160 unless it is guided by a thing like LZB or ETCS, full supervision. Whereas a freight train can never go faster than 120 unless it has a special permit from the Eisenbahnbundesamt. This is connected by this terminology. And what is also very interesting is that trains, so that they can be running, need to be allowed. So the dispatcher need to allow the train to run. They need to be zugelassen in German. And this happens typically, and now we're getting closer to what we started our service with, by setting a signal to a proceed aspect durch Fahrtstellung eines Hauptsignals. Proceed aspect on a main signal, typically a green light or a green over yellow or a green with some white number. At least a proceed aspect that allows the train to go. This is what the dispatcher do to allow the train service. But then there are also other ways of allowing a train to go. And this is the interesting thing of Zugfahrt mit besonderem Auftrag, train service on special assignment. So it was a bit hard for me to translate the word Auftrag here because I did not want to use the word order because it also translates to Befehl, and the Befehl is a technical term that is used in a different context in the rules, and we're getting to this in a different stream, I guess. So I call this train service on special assignment. So those are all the train services that are allowed by the dispatcher that are not allowed by a proceed aspect on the main signal. For example, an Ersatzsignal, ZS1, what we have talked about a couple of weeks ago. And if you remember, I said I'm not sure where the rules come from, how to behave after passing a signal with an Ersatzsignal, the white flashing light or the three white lights ordered like in A form on the HV signals. And this is because I did not know then that every time you use that kind of allowing a train is that you end up with a Zugfahrt mit besonderem Auftrag, a train service on special assignment. And then there is a couple of rules that tell you how you have to behave if you have a train service on special assignment. We will talk about this in a special stream and video for it. Because did we start our service here with a train service on special assignment? Could have thought so, because we were not allowed by a proceed aspect on a main signal, but also not as a train service on special assignment because we got the SH1 on a main signal that showed red, HP0. That means this we can only pass not as a train service, but as a shunting service. So we are on the other side of this dividing line. We are at the moment, the way that we have stopped, we are, according to my interpretation of the rules, not a train service on special assignment, We are not a train service at all. At the moment, we can only be a shunting service, because otherwise we would not have been allowed to pass the red signal with the white lights of the SH1. But then, what does this mean for us? We will get to this later. Yeah, and obviously there are more ways to divide the train services and to draw information about this. So, Spectre, you talked about this. How can we get from one to the other? How can a train service transition to be a shunting service? How can a shunting service transition to be a train service? This way, train service to shunting service. We typically have to stop for it at our regular stopping position or at a stop signal. That is then obviously a main signal, otherwise you cannot show a stop aspect. And this is important within station limits. This is a thing that the Federal Railway Administration, the Eisenbahnbundesamt, you can read this in the information that is in the directive when they talk about why they changed their rules and regulations a couple of times. The Eisenbahnbundesamt does not want to have shunting services shunt about on the open track. That means we don't want a train service to transition into a shunting service on the open track. So this always has to happen within station limits, auf einem Bahnhof. So we stop either at our regular position or at our red signal, and then we transition into a shunting service after going on, obviously. After a stop signal or after our regular stopping position. Then we can transition into a shunting service after we have stopped. There is one exception, and this is again construction track or Anschlussstellen. We have seen this before. I have said there cannot be train services on a construction track. So if a train comes to a construction track and has to enter the construction track, he cannot be no longer be a train service, so it has to transition into a shunting service. But obviously there is no station limit at this point. So if a train has to stop before going into the construction track, for example, then this can happen on open track. Another thing is sometimes you have private tracks of factories or other installations of that kind connecting to the public railway network, what would be typically in form of an Anschlussstelle or an Ausweichanschlussstelle. And usually this is done in a way that the trains can still pass this point because the signals allow that. And there are still some situations where this is not the case, where the train actually has to stop on open track in front of the switch, and the switch needs to be set so that the train can go into the private track, even without there being any main signals securing this. And at this moment the block is still occupied by this train, and then the train can also transition into a shunting service at this point. But those are obviously exceptions that we in the game have not encountered so far, but just for understanding the system. We want the shunting services to stay within the station limits. This is why we do not allow typically train services to transition into shunting services without station limits. And we do it at stop. We can do it without a stop at this signal. The one that we have seen in our service, but we did not start as a train service and get to the signal because we were already sitting here at the platform. But there are some, especially freight services. I don't know if you remember specific ones. I remember one in Austria, for example, but this is obviously not the ruling for the German operating rules. But sometimes you drive your train, your freight train, on and on and on and on, and you're running through a station, and the next signal that you get is a red one, and already the two lights are switched on to SH1 or RA12 in the east of Germany. SH1 and RA12, you always have this distinction because this is what the signal is called in the west, and this is what the signal is called in the east. eastern part of Germany, the old Reichsbahngebiet, and then the freight train does not need to stop. But this needs to happen in station limits also, and the train number needs to be in the Streckenbuch. So this is an additional formal requirement, what we can typically assume in the game that this is the case. So this is why we can transition from a train service, a freight service, into a shunting service without stopping at this station if we get a signal of that kind. Whereas the other way around, turning from a shunting service into a Zugfahrt happens typically without a stop. And it says it happens at the next main signal if the requirements for departure are met. So if we start out as a shunting service and we have all the requirements that we would have needed to start as a train at this signal, then we can just go on and pass this signal. You see it here, there is also an exception with group exit signals. Those are signals that are not only for one track, but one signal for more tracks as an exit or starter signal. We have talked about this on the Niedertalbahn. Then this only works if those group exit signals have a light protection signal or a high semaphore protection signal for each track. In the Niedertalbahn we have the situations where we don't have any protection signals on our group exit signal, so it would not be possible to transition from a shunting service in a train service at those group exit signals without stopping. So if those requirements are not met, then we have to stop at the main signal, and after that, as soon as we get proceed aspect, then we can transition into a train service. And the interesting thing, because we are always primed that all the transitioning in speed restrictions require the full train to pass the speed change stop, as soon as the tip of the train passes the signal, the transitioning happens in this direction and in this direction. We can go without stopping. Then as soon as the tip of the train passes the signal, it turns from a shunting service into a train service or the other way around. And that means after that transition happens, we are no longer bound to the speed restrictions that are valid for shunting services. And this is the last thing that I wanted to look at today. What are the speed requirements? What are the speed limits for shunting services? There is a general speed restriction for shunting services that says max 25, and this max is quite like the restricted speed in American signaling. It means we can go 25, but we have to be wary. We have to go on site. It is lower on construction track. We have talked about that. Construction track always shunting, not faster than 20, and local regulations can also have lower speeds. But 25 is the number that you need to have in your head. As a shunting service, you are typically limited to 25. So this is the equivalent of the restricted speed that we have in the United States, the American systems, and we have to be very on site. We have to drive on site. We have to be able to stop in front of or at stop signals, and this is what we just had when we started our service here. We have to look out for the stop signals, even if they are those little ones on the floor. We cannot rely that we have a clear track until the next signal, because we have to look at all the stop signals that are in between. We have to be worried that we don't run into vehicles and danger points that are specified in local regulations, like entering points for certain switches or turntables or whatever you might have there. And obviously, and this is funny that they just put it in the rules, you have to be able to stop at the stop point where you actually planned to stop. So this is what you have to be wary of according to the rules, and what you actually have to check for. And this is what I wanted to go through, because this is a canon that is returning, especially when we were talking about Zugfahrten with besonderen Auftrag, train services on special assignment. This will return again. And this is the stuff that typically the dispatcher checks for you before he gives you a green or a proceed aspect. So we need to check, is our track clear? Fahrweg, is it clear? Is there any vehicle in the way or anything else that prevents the track from being clear? We have to check if the switches are aligned, Weichen, also derails, Gleissperren, stuff like this. We have to look for that. Are we actually going in the correct direction where we are supposed to go and where we want to go? Are the derails set in a position that allow us to pass? We also have to look for flank protection. That means we have to make sure that no other vehicles are running into our track from the side or from the opposite side. Those are those Grenzzeichen, if you remember those red and white buttons that we sometimes have in on the floor, showing us how far a vehicle can stand on a side track before it starts fouling our main track. So this is all stuff for flank protection. We need to make sure that no other vehicles are coming in, that no other vehicles are positioned in the way that they are fouling our track. We have also, if there are level crossings in our path, we have to make sure that they are secured. And if we need electrification because we are running an electric locomotive, we need to make sure that our way does not lead us into a track that does not have electrification, for example, that we are not allowed to go with our pantograph up. So those 5 things, especially the first 3, will return when we're talking about Zugfahrt mit besonderen Auftrag again. This is what we all have to have a mind for when we are shunting, when we are running our shunting service, because unlike as a train service where the dispatcher typically is checking this stuff for you before he gives you a green signal, we did not get a green signal. We are more or less running on our own responsibility for that. This is why we are limited to 25, but on site, and we have to check all this stuff on our own and make sure that this is all good so that we can go. So if the switch is not aligned properly, we have to make sure that we stop in front of it and have it aligned. If there is a vehicle standing beyond the foul marker, then we have to stop and make sure that this is removed or that we are getting a different path, and so on. Or if someone is sending us into a track where we cannot go with our raised pantograph, we have to make sure how we what we are supposed to do there, if we are actually supposed to go there, and what we are supposed to do with our pantograph. So all this is a lot of responsibility when we're shunting. And then if we are started with a signal that we have seen on this service here, like with the red one, with the SH1, with the 2 white lights, then we cannot just go according to what the HUD tells us is the line speed, because we cannot be sure that the track is clear. We cannot be sure that there are no stop signals. We cannot be sure that the switches are aligned. We cannot be sure that a flank protection is provided. We cannot be sure that the level crossings are secured. We cannot be sure that we are only going in tracks where we can go with our electrification needs. This is quite cumbersome. This is why there is a provision where we can actually go a bit faster. And I told you, is there a way to explain why we can run the service that we started with the 40 line speed actually, and not with the 25 of the general shunting speed? And there is a possibility that the Weichenwärter, our dispatcher for shunting, can announce a clear track. Freier Fahrweg angesagt. So he actually has to tell the driver, the track is clear. Ich sage den freien Fahrweg an bis zum, until a certain point in the track, typically a signal, like one of those little dwarf signals that we have there. And then we can go with 40, but we still have to be wary, we still have to be on site. But it relieves us from certain things that we have to check for. But there are certain requirements for that. The driver needs to be in a cab at the tip of a train, so we cannot drive our train from the back cab and pushing it wherever. So obviously in a driving trailer, cab car, this is okay because we are in the cab at the tip of a train. All vehicles need to be connected to the brake pipe, and all working air brakes need to be cut in, and a brake test must be done successfully. Then we can, if the Weichenwärter announces a free track, then we can go with 40 max instead of 25 max, and we can also do this if we are only a light engine or a pair of engines, because obviously then we don't need to make sure that all our vehicles are connected to the brake pipe. And what is the benefit of that? Not only that we can go up to 40 kilometers per hour, but we are also relieved of those two check thingies. We can rely that the track is clear up to the point that the dispatcher, the Weichenwärter, told us that it will be clear, and at the same time we can be sure that the switches are aligned properly. So we don't have to make sure of those two things. We still have to make sure of flank protection, and we still have to make sure that the other things like level crossings and the electrification needs are met. But those two important things, if we have a clear track and the switches are aligned properly, can be assumed as provided, because this is what the dispatcher already checked for us, because he only is allowed to announce a clear track if he made sure that those two things are provided for. And then we can go 40 as a shunting service. And one interesting thing, the rules say that local regulations can default this announcement. They can say that according to local regulations, if for certain shunting services, it is typically guaranteed that the track is clear and the switches are aligned, so that the dispatcher could announce a clear track. Then we can assume this even without the dispatcher telling it every shunting service running there. So the local regulations can default this announcement and say, even if it is not told to you every time, specifically, you can assume that this is the case. So if we're going back to our service that we have been running, we get the presentation out of the way. Just do this one more. We did not do a lot. Restart the game. So if we start our train in this situation, come on, game, show me the situation where we are starting at a red signal that is switched to a red signal with the two white lights. We know that we cannot pass this signal as a train service. So even if we might have been a train service before, now sitting at our typical stopping position, we can without problem transition into a shunting service at this point. Lights, AFB, and Perny Life, thank you for appearing on the chat for the first time. He says, I saw the ETCS videos, was incredibly helpful. Your content is super cool. Thank you very much. This is so encouraging. And I'm always happy if my stuff is considered helpful. Because I always think the this game is so much more fun the more you actually understand of what is happening there. And even as dilettantes, we can always try to understand as much of it as possible. So we have closed our doors, passengers are in, and we will probably, Tony Live says, I fully agree. And now we're starting our train as a shunting service. Typically we would be limited to 25. Since this is happening a lot here at this station, Munich is a big terminal station, Kopfbahnhof, where this might actually happen a lot maybe. So I assume, for the sake of the game, that we are in a situation where local regulations allow us to assume that the dispatcher has announced a clear track, so that we can go with 40 here. But we still have to go maximum 40 and on site. And this means we have to look out for red dwarf signals and be able to stop in front of them, like this one. And this is why we're sitting here now and waiting for, we can contact the dispatcher, the Weichenwärter, and he says no, you have to wait for the signal to change. And this is what we're doing. If we look at this, we can see that there is a green light. Obviously there is a train coming in that is still in our path. Here you can see our path, and here's a train coming in. Here is it already. That is conflicting with our path. So this signal here is actually providing flank protection for this train by stopping us. Spectre says, maybe a stupid question, but why do they do it this way? They set the Fahrstraße and the ECE should be good to go. Is Munich too complicated for that? The easy answer, I think, is because we don't have the signals for it. Why we don't have the signals for it, I typically cannot tell you. Do we still have a brake on? Why things are done in a certain way at a certain place is nothing that we can hope to fully understand without having all the documentation for the stations and the tracks and the signaling and all the stuff. Sometimes it is only to be explained with historical reasons. Sometimes in terminal stations you have this special situations that trains are coming in and going out on the same track, so they get into each other's way necessarily. At the same time, when they are leaving on the wrong track, or they have to go on the wrong track when they are arriving, because they are supposed to go on the right track, and so on. So maybe if we looked closer into the setup of the station at Munich, we could understand it better. Now we've passed an LF7 sign, allowing us to go 113. As soon as we have passed the sign with our 2 trains, I think we have. Here we're actually quite long. Then the HUD will switch to 130. I think we are not allowed to go 130 at this point because we are still a shunting service. So we are limited to 40 even now the HUD has switched to 130. We already see a main signal coming up. That is giving us a proceed aspect, a clear one. especially. And now that the tip of the train is passing the signal, bling, we have transitioned into a train service, because now we can assume that the prerequisites for departure are met, and we have our proceed aspect, and now we can accelerate to the 130. Easy on the CFA. Yeah, I'm always hitting the CFA much too often, sorry. True, says Spectre. Train symbol 224 has made me rather humble when it comes to German rules and regulations. The problem is, the more you learn about it and the more you find out, the more you see what there is to understand and what you have not understood so far. So getting on a journey like trying to understand stuff that you are actually not really trained for, like me, for example. You start to understand some things, and then you dig deeper and you find that you have not understood things at all, and then you think, now I'm understanding this and that, and then you dig deeper and think, this is still confusing and not the way I expected it to be, and then you have to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and so you're uncovering layers and layers and layers, and still on this journey you are understanding more and more and more. See, Sifa lady? CD radar told me to be easy on you. And that's what I said in the beginning, with the local regulations being able to have different regulations quite a lot, and especially on stations or in station areas or in big station areas like this one here, you encounter a lot of weird peculiarities, and then you don't know, is this a peculiarity that exists in real life, or is it a peculiarity because they did it not properly in the game? Thank you very much for the subscription, Perny Life. Now we are 3 subscribers since AJ subscribed for 6 more months, and Theodoros is still subscribed. Thank you so much for the support. For example, Schnellfahrstrecke Köln-Aachen. There is a situation where you have 2 distant signals without a main signal in between. And I thought, this is a weird situation, probably a bug in the game, and then you watch a cab ride video and it is just the same in real life. You have 2 distant signals, 2 Vorsignale, next to each other without a main signal in between. And I still don't know why. Now we passed an isolated ZS3, ZS3, allowing 14. We have to pass it with the full train. Then we can accelerate to 140. Even before the anschließende Reichenbereich ended. Here was an LF7 for 160. We have to pass it with the full train. The AFB is actually working really nicely on this train here, on this track at least. I've never seen it overshoot. And now more or less comes the easy part, because we are going into LZB soon. And then we will see if we have on this journey the interesting covered PZB situation im Endeverfahren for LZB. or if this is only on the other service that I prepared. That we will probably not fully run on this stream, because I talked so long about the regulations. The CD radar, yes. And the Schnarre did not listen to you. It was not psht. The psht is for the icon that we have on the outside of our train, because we have those compartments where you're not supposed to use your mobile phones and stuff. So wait, you make a presentation explaining concept for every single stream? Yeah, that is actually not for every single stream, but for most of them. Some of them are only B-reel streams, then I don't have a presentation then. That's crazy. Kudos says, yes, of course. Yeah. Well, most of them have a presentation. Some streams are like special events, like for 250 subscribers, or upcoming hopefully 500 subscribers on YouTube. Then there will be no presentation necessarily, or when I just try to find some bugs or other things, or to do some experiments, then not necessarily a presentation. But I should say every normal video on my channel has a presentation in it. I'm not doing the stream every week. Sometimes I need to take a break. And if you have any suggestions for topics that should be covered, always tell me. Have you tried out the editor? Yes, I've tried out the editor, and it is really cool that we have the editor, but I stopped my work on the editor because I still can't share it properly. As far as I know, you still can't make pack files in the editor. And before this does not work, I don't want to invest too much time in it. So, 230 is our maximum speed that we will be allowed to run on this line. On the left are the tracks for the S-Bahn. CD Radio, you played the S-Bahn here a lot. The timetable, as far as I have seen, really urges you to drive the S-Bahn services. Like you said the other day, drive it like you stole it. You really have to more or less apply full power from the start and brake very late to stay on time. But from what I've seen, this actually works even in the snow on those trains. Yeah, and now we are in LZB. And I've watched a video on YouTube from some guy who is running a school for train drivers in Germany. And he said, well, he does not need to talk a lot about LZB because even a trained poodle can run a train under LZB. Unfortunately, none of our dogs is a poodle, otherwise we could have tried. And CD Razor says he likes the BR423 and it is like a metro train. Yeah, I guess this is just the way that you would drive a metro train. Accelerate hard, brake late. Because you need to get a checkload of people through the line. Pony Life says, I'm addicted to the Stadler Flirt. It's way too easy to drive. Well, that's a bit the idea, isn't it? Those trains like the 423 or the Stadler Flirt or the 377 in the UK. Those trains are built so that they are relaxed and easy to drive. Not like a steam engine where you have to screw about your regulator and your reverser all the time. And at the same time look at your watch to know how fast you are traveling. Is DB Netz a separate company or does it belong under DB? As far as I know, it belongs to the concern, but it is a separate company. And there are special regulations that make sure that it is not controlled totally by DB, so that other competitors have equal access to the tracks. But it's funny enough because it is part of the DB concern, but then the DB Betriebsgesellschaften are more or less customers of DB Netz. There is actually a discussion going on whether they should be separated more, so that the DB Netz is no longer part of the DB concern. It was actually not so long ago that there was public talk about this, but then, as often the case with things like this, it just stopped being talk and nothing changed. CD Raider says, yeah, that's exactly what happened here. So that it did not get separated. Oh, it did. It got separated. Well, I think it is not so important. Now we got announced that we have to slow down to 150 sometime in the future. But we still have to have more than 10 kilometers until this happens. So what I do, I just set the throttle to neutral and let the train coast. We will be reminded by a big red G, or more or less a white G on red ground, that we are getting into the braking curve and that it might be nice to apply some brakes. As long as the G is not flashing, we have all the time in the world to adjust our brakes the way that we want it. Just have to make sure that I don't miss the spot with the PCB Endeverfahren, where we might get a covered 1000 Hertz monitoring. Yeah, what I wanted to say, I don't think that this is so super important whether you separate the two things on the legal basis. It's more important that it is made sure by law that the Netz AG, the infrastructure company, can operate independently enough. In Austria it is quite like here. ÖBB Infra belongs to the ÖBB concern, as far as I know. In the United Kingdom it is completely different. National Rail is a publicly owned company that does not have anything to do with the railway carriers, as far as I know. Now the G is there. We can... We are getting this weird reflection in the windscreen that we're sometimes getting on this train. The point is that the railway operator can then favor its parent transport company over other private carriers. Yeah, that's true. This is obviously the thing that you need to make sure that does not happen. Problem is, if you separate them on a company law level, then there are still the same people inside that you had before, and then you have to make sure that they don't favor their parent company just as well. So we're down to the 150. Or we still coast on. Here's the 150 sign. And now we're getting shown a speed of 90. What is probably already our release speed. There's a weird point because the speed increases to 150 again before we actually get released. Closer than 4 kilometers to the release. And what I want to show now is thing with the hidden influencing, with the hidden 1000 Hertz monitoring. I want to go about like 120-ish. And maybe I can actually provoke a penalty break for that, so that we can all see. Now we're getting the end procedure. Ende is flashing, I press the release key. The Ende is now solid yellow. And it is giving us a release speed of 150, what is nonsense. It should give us a release speed of 90 here. And show us how long we are going until we are released. But this is not happening here. So I guess this is the bug. Now we should get the release speed here and the distance until release. Because now we are still under LZB, but we have to adhere to PZB stuff. In this phase, during the end proceedings, during the end procedure, we are not getting our PZB indicators. We are still running under LZB, but we already have to adhere to PZB regulations. And see what is coming here. A 90 LFC 6 sign armed with a 1000 Hertz magnet. And we know on the 90 speed limit we have to acknowledge the 1000 Hertz if we are traveling 15 kilometers faster than the announced speed. That means if we are traveling with more than 105 kilometers. And if we're going back into our cap, we're traveling 120. We didn't get it. We did not have to acknowledge it because we are still under LZB. Same thing happens here now. Now we're getting it on a signal. And now we have the 1000 Hertz on all of a sudden. And if we are not fast enough to get under the 80, we will get a Zwangsbremsung. So we made it fast enough under the 80 here, but this is a trap where you can easily fall in if you do not know that you have to adhere to PCB regulations and that you can get a hidden 1000 Hertz monitoring even if you did not acknowledge it during the phase where the yellow end lamp is lit up. Now we did get a new 1000 Hertz for the VR0, and we can just roll into the... If you want to set the the RFB to something new, you know, you have to do it to 0 and then back to like 60 or wherever you want to go. Before that it does not work. After the end procedure you have to set the AFB to 0. You don't have to turn off the throttle necessarily, but the RFB needs to be set to 0 and then you can use it again. 500 Hertz incoming. And we are always early with those ICE services. You tend to be always late with the S-Bahn, but you're always early with the ICE services. And here we are in Augsburg. Purdy Life says, do any other routes have a fully working ETCS system other than the S-Bahn route in Switzerland? Unfortunately not. It's debatable whether this one that the S-Bahn route in Switzerland is a fully working ETCS, but it is quite good. But still I think that Rivet has bitten off more than they can chew with the ETCS implementation there. But unfortunately there is no other route with ETCS in the game so far. I'm always hoping. And that's a rubbish ETCS, says CD Radar. Well, this is what I said in a more polite way when I said that it is debatable whether it is a fully implemented ETCS or a fully working one. I think they did quite a good job. It is just really a big thing to implement. And the CD Radar says, how does the system know that this is 1000 Hz for 90 and it applies from 105 kilometers and that it is not 1000 Hz for the yellow aspect? Well, the train and the PCB never knows whether it got 1000 Hz for a yellow aspect or for a 90 or for 70 or whatever. It just gets the 1000 Hz and then it starts its braking curve. You have to slow down to the 80 within your 23 seconds and then you're good until you maybe get the 500 Hertz magnet, and it goes on. So the program is always the same. The train and the PCB computer does not know what it got the 90 for. At the 90 and 80 signs, you typically have like a Geschwindigkeitsprüfabschnitt factored into this. So there is a whole set of magnets, so that the 1000 Hertz magnet is only turned on if the speed checking loop, the overspeed loop, registers a speed that is faster than 15 kilometers above the limit. And if the train is slower, then the 1000 Hertz magnet gets switched off, so that you do not get the influencing at all. But as soon as the train is faster than the 105 at the 90 or the 95 at the 80 reduction, then the 1000 Hertz magnet is active and the train gets the normal 1000 Hertz influencing, and then the 1000 Hertz monitoring starts. And this is always the same, whether it is a slowdown to 90 or it is a yellow aspect. The yellow aspect then has later the 500 Hertz for the train to give him additional information. But the trick here is actually that the train registers the active 1000 Hertz magnet even though you are still in LZB and you are not getting the indicators. So as soon as you're dropping out of the Endeverfahren, the 1000 Hertz monitoring is active. And then if you are too fast and can't get your speed below the 80 within the 23 seconds starting at the magnet, then you get a penalty break. Or if you are still too fast, then you will get an overspeed penalty break from the PCB. And Perny Life says, I mean, it's not that bad, it's better than nothing. That is true. I think it is not that bad. They did a decent job, given that it is such a small DLC and that they had to more or less make it on their own because they did not get any support or something from DTG from that. And for that, it is really, really, really a decent job that they did. Obviously, there's a lot still to do, and I always think that DTG should take over and make it a thing that is not only on the narrow shoulders of a third-party developer here. So they did a decent job. They should have kudos for that, but obviously it's far from being perfect. Alright, I think it is 1 hour 23. Let's have a shortish video this week and stop the stream here. We could do a second run on the ICE that starts already at a SH1 signal, not as an HP0 with an SH1, but only with SH1 signals. And I guess the idea is the same here. We're starting as a shunting service. We are limited to the 40 and on-site rules, with the track clear announcement defaulted by local regulations, as we can assume in the game, and then add the first main signal as soon as the tip of the train passes it. We transition into a train service. Thanks a lot, guys, for the input. Nice to have you on the stream. Perny Live, thank you. CD Radar, thank you Spectre for your input. Thank you AJ for moderating the stream. See you around, guys. Have a good time and take care.